So the first thing, of course, is to get to the Desmos calculator, which you can do from any web search. Type in Desmos, and eventually it'll come back, and you can choose the graphing calculator. That will open up a blank graph and a blank list of equations. What we'll need to do first is enter in the data that we want to use. So we go over here and we say add a data table, and we can just type in some data. We should always make sure our data table headings correspond to things that we're doing. So I'm going to change this to being, for instance, a time and a position. We see immediately that nothing's happened because our data happens to be outside the window of the graph that we have here. So we need to add in a better window and do some other little fancy things. So we're going to go over to the settings, which is the little wrench here on the right. And we're going to first of all say that our axes are a time axis in seconds and a position axis in centimeters. But we're also going to say that the horizontal axis ranges over not minus 10 to 10, but let's say something like minus 1 to something like 4. That captures all of our time intervals. It also forces there to be an axis. If we were to go say 1 to 4, we would end up with no axis drawn because it's off to the side. So I'm going to go to negative and generally do that just to make sure that we get some coverage of where the axes are. Likewise, we're going to go down here and we say the vertical axis ranges from something like minus 10 to something like, let's say, 140. There's no fine and fast rule for figuring out how big the window has to be, but your idea is to try and make it fit nicely onto the screen without wasting too much space. In fact, I'm going to tighten this a little bit so that we have most of the window covered is our data. It's really important that all of our data be represented, but we also don't want to squeeze everything down into one little corner and waste a lot of page space. And then when we're done with this, we can click the wrench again, and we see a much nicer collection of data points, which are believably linear, which is nice because that's what should be going on here. Then we say that we want to add a regression effect, so we go down to another box and we type in the relation we think between the two variables. It's important that since we're taking a list, we don't use an equal sign, which would tell Desmos to plot that relation. We use instead the tilde or the relation operator, which says find the connection between them. So I'm going to say that I think, since this is linear, that x1 is something like a speed times the time plus some initial offset. And immediately puts in a line and says that this is our best fit, although it's not a particularly great looking fit, to be honest. So let's just do this. Oh, because of this data point over here, that's why. So I'm going to move this a little bit so we can see. So it's like 5 seconds. And then we see that's our fit's, yeah, not spectacular, but not terrible. Anyway, that's our best fit that we can get, so that's where we're going to go with it. If we had multiple data sets, then we would just continue to repeat this by, say, for instance, adding another data table, and then renaming our data tables again. And it's important that they have a distinct name, so this is a time, but it's going to be part 2. And likewise x2, so as to indicate that these are some other collection of data points. If we don't do that, the computer is going to get very confused as to which data table we need, and it will plot one or the other. I don't honestly know which one offhand, but it's almost certainly the wrong one. And then we would have to do the same thing here. We'd say that this x2 is proportional to some velocity times the time plus some other offset. We see that this is a somewhat faster cart, which makes sense. So that's the basics of getting your data into Desmos and getting a basic graph up. In the second part of this video, we'll look at how to add some other options such as changing the color or printing or sharing the graph and some other things.